I list to this day on Facebook and all that social media stuff, I list Democracy Now! As my university. And I feel in a lot of ways like I got my undergraduate degree at the Catholic Worker and on a ladder with Phil Berrigan, and then I got a master's degree from Amy Goodman. And it taught me a real life lesson. It also taught, and journalism, this shouldn't be viewed as a career. It shouldn't be viewed as something you do because you think you're going to make money or somehow you're going to get famous. It's a working class job. But more where your fingers have to get dirty because you have to be out in the field, you have to be with the people, you have to embed not with the soldiers but with ordinary people who live on the other side of the scale, who live on the other side of the gun, who live on the other side of huge corporate or institutional power. But more than that, it has to burn in your heart as a way of life. You know, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I view myself as a journalist. And the job of journalists in a society that purports to be a democratic society should basically fall down to a few simple principles. You want to give voice to the voiceless, you want to hold those in power accountable, and you want to provide people with information that they can use to make informed decisions about what actions they want to take, about if they want to vote at all, if they do vote, who they want to vote for, and what they want the society in which they live to look like, and what they want the policies emanating from that society to look like. That's a very simple concept. And yet what do we see when we turn on the endless stream of channels that exist out there? Well, we have MSNBC, which often looks like an Obama for America meetup, where it's just this sort of worshiping of the current administration, or Fox News, which is a parody of itself. You know, Saturday Night Live doesn't ever need to make fun of Fox News because Fox News is funny enough on its own to just watch. You know, I mean, so on Fox News you have this, you know, the scary black Marxist Manchurian candidate who wants to resurrect Chairman Mao and put him in power in the United States and make Reverend Wright the Minister of Internal Affairs in this country. That's what you hear on Fox News about Barack Obama. On MSNBC, you hear that Barack Obama can do no wrong, and on CNN, you have Xanax in the form of television, where you can just zone out and not, you know. Does anyone watch CNN, this thing with this plane that went down in Malaysia? It's like the whole time I watch CNN now, it's this one reporter in a flight simulator. That's all I ever see on CNN today, and that passes as news. And so we're left with a bankrupt media culture in this country. I'm all in favor of social media. I think Twitter and Facebook, well, Facebook has big problems with surveillance and using data and all that, but I'm talking about how it's used by particularly young media activists. It can be a very powerful tool, particularly for fact-checking those in power. When correspondents from the New York Times or other media outlets try to get away with saying something, a lot of young people will go after them and they'll prove them wrong, and it's happened repeatedly, and now they all have to be on their toes and figure out what this Twitter thing is about. But if we lose the institution of investigative journalism, of fact-checking, of peer review, of edited pieces, of old-school muckraking, of document diving like I.F. Stone did, or going to the scene as Seymour Hersh did, if we lose that and we cede everything to social media, to this Ritalin society, then we're going to be in far worse shape than we are now, and we're already at the lowest point in terms of media relevance to ordinary people in our society that we've ever been in. We have never been in a moment where fewer people control a greater percentage of access to media than they do right now. You know, a lot of people don't understand this, but this is true. There is no such thing as private airwaves in this country. The airwaves are totally public. Fox doesn't own the airwaves. CNN doesn't own the airwaves. MSNBC doesn't own the airwaves. PBS doesn't own the airwaves. The airwaves belong to the people. They're just visiting those airwaves. But that's not how they would have you think. They would have you think that the corporate advertisers and the made-up media personalities that they call journalists that appear on television, that they're the ones that are the rightful owners of that media space, but it's just not true. One of the premier battles of our lifetime is to try to get these corporations out of our lives, out of our electoral process in this country, out of the domination of the media. In fact, when young people say, you know, what should I be working on today? You can work on all sorts of issues that are meaningful, the police state in some of the communities in this country, prisons, police brutality, ongoing racism, issues of war and militarism, the war that's going on against our environment. But in this country, when we're talking as an audience of people that live inside the United States, the number one issue any of us could be working on that speaks to all of those issues is getting corporations out of our election process. Why are corporations considered people now under this Citizens United decision? If corporations, and I'm totally against the death penalty, 100%, I don't care who the person is, I'm against the death penalty 100%. But if corporations are people, when they commit crimes, why don't they get the death penalty? Like, why aren't they laid down? Why is it that the poor, people of color are in the crosshairs of that system for committing crimes, many of which are born of the conditions to which they are born into, and not because there's some evil streak running through our economically disadvantaged communities in this country? We never give young folks in this country who get busted on a drug possession or for committing a robbery, they almost never get a break. But these corporations, they're allowed off the hook nonstop all the time, second, third, fourth chances. Who went to jail over Hurricane Katrina? Who went to jail over the implosion of the economy in this country? Who went to jail over these wars? You know, you can tell a lot about our society by who's on a book tour and who's in jail. Right now, you know who's in jail? John Kiriakou, who's a former CIA operative who blew the whistle on waterboarding. He's serving a federal prison sentence right now. You know who's on a book tour? Donald Rumsfeld. You know who's living in exile in Moscow right now? Edward Snowden. We wouldn't be talking about the NSA today if it wasn't for Edward Snowden. Barack Obama would not be talking about reforming the NSA if it wasn't for Edward Snowden. And yet Edward Snowden is living in exile. People think he's living fat. He's not living fat. He's living in a situation where the U.S. has stated that they want to take him back here and lock him up for life. So he's over there in exile, and Jose Rodriguez is on a book tour. Now, who's Jose Rodriguez? Jose Rodriguez is the man who was responsible for creating the CIA's system of so-called black sites around the world post 9/11. These prisons in Poland and Thailand and Ukraine and elsewhere, where they were taking people who were snatched in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and elsewhere, shipping them to these secret prisons, and then ripping their fingernails out, waterboarding them, slamming their heads against doors, putting them in boxes with insects, depriving them of food, blasting music into their ears to the point of popping eardrums, popping them around from one site to another to where they didn't know up from down, telling Muslim prisoners that they were being taken to Tel Aviv to be handed over to the custody of the Mossad. This man is on a book tour with his memoir called Hard Measures. Sounds to me like some kind of weird Swedish porno movie or something. Hard Measures by Jose Rodriguez. He's on a book tour and Edward Snowden is in exile. You can tell a lot about our society by who's on book tour when it comes to this war and who's in prison. We're living in a moment where a Democratic president who is a constitutional lawyer by training, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, is presiding over a global assassination campaign. And the most devastating aspect of this is that President Obama has convinced the majority of liberals in this country, according to every available poll, that the U.S. not only has the right to conduct these operations around the world, but is right to do so. Somewhere Dick Cheney is in Wyoming, fly fishing, having a good chuckle, because had a Republican been elected in 2008 or in 2012, we would have had a very different discourse in this country about killing American citizens with drones, about waging wars in a country where Congress has not officially declared war. But a lot of us have just been asleep at the wheel. We've sort of checked our consciences at the doors of this presidency. Now, I don't want Mitt Romney to be president. I don't want Jeb Bush to be president. I don't want Marco Rubio to be president. But it's easy to be against these policies when cartoonish villains like Dick Cheney are in power. When your principles actually show, when you're actually forced to sort of look yourself in the mirror, is when people you might like are in office, or with whom you agree on many other issues. I didn't want Mitt Romney picking Supreme Court justices. I didn't want John McCain picking Supreme Court justices. This isn't about electoral politics. This is about principle. It doesn't matter whether Democrat or Republican. If you're against something, then you're against it when your guy is in office just as much as you are when the other guy is in office. And that's what principles are. You know, that if we really cared, you know, in this country about threats to our security, we'd be looking at the environment, we'd be looking at the way we treat poor people in this country, we'd be looking at how we treat working people in this country, and we would be looking at the violence that comes from legalized ownership of guns that people should not have in ordinary life in this society. If we really cared, journalists can play an incredible role in generating empathy, in generating sympathy. And that happens in our society in those moments when we're hit. I mean, I live in New York. I saw after 9/11, you'd see those signs where people would tell, where they're looking for their loved ones and missing, and the media coverage was incredible. It's like the journalists actually cared and wanted us to care and say, these are your people. This could have been your daughter or your son, or that could have been the teacher that blockaded that door. That could have been your teacher back when you were in 3rd grade or 2nd grade. What if we had a media culture that treated victims of drone strikes in the same way? Or a media culture that actually treated military families in that way? It's incredible. We think that we're inundated with images about the military. We're not. We don't get a fraction of coverage about the PTSD that's being suffered right now, about the war crimes that are being committed, and about the ghosts and demons that so many veterans are carrying around with them. We don't hear anything about the real widows of Baghdad, but we know everything about the real housewives of Beverly Hills. We know what kind of Pinot Grigio they're drinking, what brand of poodle that they have. We don't know jack shit about what's going on in rural Yemen, rural Afghanistan, rural Somalia. We don't know what's going on in the neighborhoods of color in this country, where police are often waging a war on young people. Or what happens in the prisons in this country. Why is that? It's because we have an absolute media failure. This is the last thing I'm going to say. Coming from the Catholic worker movement, people always say, well, you know, you're not going to be able to do anything about this. First of all, I think that's untrue. I think we need to wake up in this country and start being about the business. You know, Dan Berrigan liked to say, you know, don't just say something, stand there. And I think it's brilliant, and I'll leave you with this. Eamon Hennessy, who was an anarchist pacifist and was really influential in the early stages of the Catholic worker movement, was a World War I draft resistor. And he was picketing in front of the White House, and that it was not a popular cause at the time. And a journalist came up to Eamon Hennessy and said to him, you know you're not going to change their minds. And he said, maybe, but they sure as hell aren't going to change mine. And I think those are words to live by. Thank you guys for everything that you do.